Hello, Ron is with another tutorial, and in this tutorial I want to be replying to your questions. So I made a post on YouTube and I asked some of you guys to submit your questions about skin retouching and maybe the problems most of you have been encountering maybe while doing skin retouching in Photoshop. And this tutorial is for all of you guys who submitted your questions, and I won't be handling like each and every question. I'm just going to do my best to reply to every single problem you guys are facing with skin retouching in Photoshop. So the very first one was how to get the right skin texture for your images. So most of you people ask this question, and I'm just going to be handling that with or alongside maybe having the best details and maybe using the mixer brush tool and setting it right. And those who usually get that random texture every single time you're trying to do skin retouching. So let's just click in and start learning about that. And if at all you find this video really helpful, don't forget to like this video. So the very first thing you have to know about frequency separation is you have to create it the best way and you have to apply the best values possible so that you can retain as much natural texture as possible in all your images. So usually for frequency separation we have two layers. So I'm just going to come right here and I create those two layers by hitting Ctrl or Command J. So these are two layers, and usually we name this low frequency, and we usually name this, just going to double click, and we usually name this high frequency. So in order to get the best out of the images, usually we come and turn this off and we select the low frequency layer, and this is the step that is going to determine the amount of details or texture in your images. So I just want you guys to pay maximum attention, because once you mess up with this step, you are not going to be able to get the best out of the textures or the details in the skin in the images every single time you retouch your photos. So we come to this low frequency layer, and at this point is when we have to remove or blur out the textures from the skin. So remember, it is these textures or the details that we subtract but later on get after retouching the image. So remember, every single texture that you take out on this step, it is that detail or the texture that you're going to be remaining with in the final image. So let's just come to filter, blur, and we come to Gaussian blur. So we're just going to let that load. So usually the radius is going to be at 0, and when we reach this step you can see that we have all the details in the image, and this is where you have to monitor the texture or the details. So look for the area that has prominent textures or details in the image. So I think we're just going to go with this. Look for the area that has prominent texture, not the blemishes, but prominent texture in the image. So for this case, I think on the nose area we have more details in the textures. So we're just going to start moving this radius up to a point when we start losing out on those details in this particular area. So just left click and start moving this towards the right hand side. So just move it up to a point when the details are just starting to get lost. Don't take it, don't cram these details, just make sure you drag it up to that point when you're starting to lose out on the details in the skin. So just going to move this, and I think at around 7, that is when I'm starting to lose out the details. And when I move over the skin, you can notice that the overall skin is looking a little bit blurry, and we only have a blurry image right here. So just come and hit OK. So it is that texture that we have removed that we're going to be able to get back in the final image after doing the skin retouching. So after doing that, usually for frequency separation, we come and select the high frequency layer and now activate it. Then we come to image and we come to apply image, and this step also determines the details that you're going to be remaining with in your overall image. So we usually come to this and we get this folder or window right here. So you can notice that we have a 16-bit image. So usually when you're working with your images, you have 8-bit and 16-bit. Those are the most common bit depth, but if at all you want to work with a bigger range or details in images, I prefer you always change your bit depth or bit number to 16 bits. So after doing that, we come to, since we have 16 bit, we come and select the low frequency layer. Remember, we are subtracting the textures from the low frequency layer. That's why I have selected it. And the blending mode for a 16-bit image usually is add. And when you select add, make sure the opacity is 100. Preserve transparency and mask are not checked. The scale has to be 2 and offset at 0. But for a 16-bit image, you have to check this option. And you can see that we have the textures on this gray kind of layer. So make sure you apply the right settings for the right bit depth of images. If at all you apply maybe the subtract option for a 16-bit image, you may not be able to get the best details out of your images. So this is for a 16-bit image. So blend mode is add, opacity at 100, scale is to offset 0, and invert is checked. But if at all you have an 8-bit image, you have to simply come and select the low frequency layer. The invert option is usually not checked, and the blend mode has to be subtract. Opacity at 100, preserve transparency and mask are not checked. The scale has to be 2 and offset 128. So these are settings for an 8-bit image. So since I have a 16-bit image, I'm just going to come and select the low frequency layer, blend mode, add, opacity at 100, scale is 2, offset 0, and I check the invert option and hit OK. So I'm just going to come to the blend mode to review back my image, which is going to be a linear light. I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview about the whole frequency separation procedure or technique. So usually we put these in a group by hitting Ctrl or Command and clicking on both and dragging them into this folder like icon, put them in a group, and we name that frequency separation. So right now we are done separating the frequencies of the image. So right now we have to achieve the details or the best results from the image, and in order to achieve those best details in the skin, we're going to be blending or evening out the skin tones of this particular image. So in order to do that well, we have two different techniques that we're going to be combining to achieve the best results out of this particular image. And I would recommend that every single time you're retouching, you combine the two techniques to have the best out of your retouching. So these two techniques, you're going to be using the mixer brush tool and the lasso tool method. So a mixer brush tool helps us to blend out the unevenness in the skin tones. I hope you can see that we have an or inconsistent skin tone transition. So with the help of a mixer brush tool, you're just going to be painting that skin so that we can have that kind of even transition with the skin tones. Just come to this frequency separation group and open it. And usually when we are doing skin retouching, we work on the low frequency layer. So before we can set up the mixer brush tool, you have to get into consideration or note that the low frequency layer is whereby we where we even out or we do the skin retouching anyway, and the high frequency layer is where we remove the details or the textures or the blemishes or pimples from the images. So it is as simple as that. So come to the low frequency layer, and as it is selected, come under the brushes, simply right click and get your mixer brush tool. And for other versions of Photoshop, your mixer brush tool may be right here. So just right click and look for your mixer brush tool. So this is the mixer brush tool and not your ordinary brush. So we have to set this up. You can see that my mixer brush tool is like this cross-like icon. The reason for that is because we have the caps lock key turned on. So make sure you turn off the caps lock key and you have the mixer brush tool looking circular in nature. And for settings, usually come and make sure the hardness is at 0, and you select clean brush because you want the brush as clean as possible with no color embedded in it. And we have two options right here. The first one is load the brush after each and every stroke, and the second is clean the brush. So since we want the brush to be clean every single time you're trying to paint over a skin or create that nice transition within the skin tone. We want the brush to be cleaned each and every single time because we have different colors or different tonal variations in the skin tone of this model. And for the weight, we are going to be using 9%, load is 75, mix is 90%, and the flow 100. So I prefer to use these settings, but if at all you have any other that you prefer, you can use those settings as long as they work best for you. So for this has, you shouldn't mark or check this, because when you check this and you start painting over the skin, remember we are on the low frequency level. When you start painting over the skin, it means that it's going to be also sampling the textures and painting it in this low frequency layer. So we don't want that to happen when you are doing skin retouching. So that is a mistake, and most of you guys have been encountering this. So make sure you don't check this option, make sure it is turned off. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z or Command Z or Z to undo that. So make sure this is off and make sure the low frequency layer is selected. And the technique that I want to use, or I usually use when I'm trying to even out the skin tones, is I simply come to the high frequency layer and I turn it off. And in this way you can see every single area that has inconsistent skin tone transitions, and you can zoom in if at all you want by hitting Ctrl plus or Command plus, and you zoom in, and you can see that we have to paint right here, we have to paint right here, we have to paint right there. You can see those are bumpiness in the skin tone transition. So the way I do this, I simply left click. So you have to left click and hold down, maybe if at all using a touchpad or your mouse. This is more of a beginner kind of tutorial, and I'm not going to be covering for those that use retouching tablets or graphics pens. So you left click on the mouse or your touchpad and hold down and start painting just like that. So just come and paint just like that. So as we're doing this, you're going to notice that this is going to be turning out like a more of a smudge paint or like an oil paint kind of look. And as you're achieving this, you're going to notice that you're achieving the best results. Right now you can see that you're distorting the image, but as you're painting, you can notice that we are really getting it to look like an oil painting with even colors. So that means that we are going to be achieving the best out of our retouched image. So just come and left click. So we are basically trying to paint colors that look alike. So you can see that I'm painting this right here and it looks alike. So I have this kind of I should call it a cheekbone. I'm just going to paint it just like that. So I'm just flattening these tones and creating a nice and smooth transition within the skin tone using my mixer brush tool. So left click and paint just like that to get even transition within the skin tone. And you can increase or reduce on the size of your brush by using the box brackets on the keyboard. So just use that to play around with the size of your mixer brush tool. So just come, you can see right here we had uneven skin tones, so we're just trying to merge them into the skin, and we want to see what we have done so far. So when you turn on the high frequency or texture layer, you can notice that we still have our textures intact in the image, and when you zoom out, Command minus to zoom out, and we come to the group and we turn this on and off, you can see what we have just done using the mixer brush tool. So the texture is still there, but we are as well getting the skin details or creating a nice looking image with no bumpiness within the skin tone. So you can come and continue evening out those skin tones if at all you have the time in the world to work on the images. So this is for those that had issues concerning having maybe not having the best details out of the skin every single time they try to use frequency separation as a technique of evening out or doing skin retouching on their images. So you can come, depending on the size or the area that you're trying to work on, you can reduce or increase on the size of a mixer brush tool using the box brackets on the keyboard. So let's just do this because I don't want this to be like my usual long tutorials. I'm just trying to rush through, and I hope you can see how the mixer brush tool works anyway, if at all you're not well conversant with it. But I would recommend that you learn how to use it, and constant practice is going to make you better every single time you're trying to work on your images using this technique. So you have to be really nice and passionate about retouching anyway. So let's just turn this back on and we see what we have done using just the mixer brush tool and just a few seconds of retouching. So this is the before and after, before, after, and usually after using the mixer brush tool, the next thing I prefer to do is using the second technique, that is using the lasso tool. So come to the lasso tool and select it. Still on the low frequency layer, you can now zoom out and make sure the feathering is above 20 pixels. So I prefer to use 22 pixels because every single time I'm selecting on the skin, it doesn't leave those rough edges. I've seen it with people that use this technique whereby you see that kind of rough selection in the edges every single time you select a skin that you want perfect in your images. So make sure your featherings are around between 20 and 25 pixels. I would recommend that. And now left click and hold down and hover around the skin. So you only have to draw over a skin and don't draw over the hair or the eyebrows. And after selecting that, simply come back to filter, then come to blur and come to Gaussian blur. And after doing that, this is the radius we initially had when we are separating the frequencies of this particular image. So you have to simply left click. Even on this step, don't cram figures. I wouldn't recommend you guys to cram figures. So just move this radius up to a point when you feel like you have the best out of the skin texture of the images. So I think at around 21 or 20, I have the best skin detail in the image. So a brief tip for you guys. What I usually do, I don't have to move this slider every single time I'm reaching this step. So we had the radius of 7. What I found out is just multiply this radius by 3, or whichever radius you may have used when you're applying or playing your frequency separation action, or maybe when you're trying to separate the frequencies of your image. Just multiply that radius by 3, and 7 by 3 is 21. So I'll delete 7 and type in 2, 1, and you can see it is the same result that we had initially before. So hit OK, and to deselect, just click anywhere else and it is automatically going to deselect, and come and start drawing shapes on other areas of the skin. So you draw a shape, right click and click on Gaussian blur, and you are going to do the same onto the other areas. So just come and select the skin and apply that Gaussian blur effect. And if at all you feel it is too much for your liking, or it makes your images look a little bit plastic, it is as simple as coming, and after you have applied the Gaussian blur effect, so you right click and come to Gaussian blur. After you have applied it and you feel like it's too much, you can simply right click on that selection and you come to fade Gaussian blur and reduce on the effect. Or the shortcut for that is going to be Shift Control F or Shift Command F, and you can reduce on the effect of the Gaussian blur. So I'm just going to leave it at 100%. So after doing that, the next thing has to be cleaning up the images. And for those that have issues cleaning up images, questions were too much, so that's why I'm trying to rush through everything. Just come to the high frequency layer. Remember, as I said at the start of this video, the details or the pores, skin details, blemishes, pimples are in this layer. So after you have blended the skin tones on the low frequency layer, just come and select the high frequency layer and get whichever tool that you want to use to remove the blemishes. So for this case, I'm just going to be using a micron stamp tool, and the hardness for this, so the hardness is going to be around 39, opacity on the flow at 100, and aligned is checked. Make sure the layer we are sampling is the current layer, so don't sample from all layers, all current and blur, only sample from the current layer. So whichever tool that you select, for example, the spot healing brush tool, make sure sample all layers is not checked rather. So if at all you're using the healing brush tool, make sure current layer is selected. So whichever tool that you prefer to use to remove the blemishes. So how this clone stamp tool works, you have to zoom in. Remember, we are removing the tiniest blemishes, so zoom in to look at them precisely. And now you can simply hold down the alternate, close the blemish. So this is the blemish. So hold down alternate or alt on the keyboard. So when you hold it down, simply left click, close the blemish, because what that does, it copies clean skin from that area. And when you hold down and left click, release both the left click and the alternate and simply click over the blemish to get rid of it. So you're just copying and stamping clean skin just like that. And I hope you can see that this really works best for you. And I have tutorials about blemish removal, so you can search on my channel and look for those videos about how to remove blemishes from your images in Photoshop. So I have very detailed tutorials about how to remove blemishes. So I'm just going to remove a few of the blemishes. I don't know why my computer is bringing that kind of black thing. So I'm just going to remove those simple blemishes for purposes of this tutorial, but you can as well take all the time you want, if at all you want the best out of your retouched images. So I think I am good to go. And the next thing I want to handle, and the most frequently asked question on that post, I hope you saw it in my community tab, and the next is going to be rather how to do dodging and banning. So for example, you are done retouching the images and you want to add shape or dimension to your images. So how we do the dodging and banning, we simply have to enhance the highlights and the shadows. So basically, global dodging and banning. Global dodging and banning is more of enhancing the highlights and the shadows of your images. And in order to enhance the highlights and the shadows, we're going to be using the curves adjustment layer to enhance the highlights and the shadows of the image. So come to the curves adjustment layer and create, that is the first curve. And when you select that, remember dodging enhances the highlights and banning enhances the shadows. So you're just going to make a midpoint and brighten just like that until the image turns a little bit brighter. And select this, make sure that this is selected, the white layer, and hit Ctrl or Command I to hide that effect. Remember, in Photoshop, white reviews and black hides. That's why it has been able to hide the effect right here. So we're just going to name this maybe dodge, and we're going to do the same for the band. So come back to the curves adjustment layer and make a midpoint, and this time around drag it down to darken it. So make sure that the white mask is selected and hit Ctrl Command I on the keyboard to hide that effect, and we're going to name that burn. So in order to do this, I'm going to put these two in a group. Select both, Ctrl, and hit Ctrl Command G on the keyboard, and you're going to name this D and B for dodge and burn. So go open this group. So just want to enhance the highlights and the shadows in this image. So we're just going to come to our brushes. So come to the brushes and simply get the normal brush tool. It is going to be a soft round brush. The settings, hardness at 0. And this time around, we're going to be using an opacity of around, 14%. So when you select the dodge, remember the dodge, when you're dodging, will be painting on the highlights. So with the brush selected, make sure it is a white brush. So make sure white is on top right here, and you can use X on the keyboard to get white on top. And to reset, you can get it by clicking on these two small boxes. So white on top, you use X, or you can toggle by using this arrow key right here. Turn off the caps lock if at all your tool is a cross like this. So turn it off. So you have to zoom in slightly. And now we want to first of all paint in the bright areas in the image to bring back or add shape or dimension to the image. So just come, make sure white is on top, and now just come and paint. So you're just dodging those areas we feel should be bright in this image. Remember, every single time we are maybe retouching using frequency separation, we tend to flatten the image, and we just want to enhance or bring back shape or dimension, that kind of three-dimensional kind of look in the image. So come to the burn and do the same. So we are now burning the shadows in the image, so just come and burn right there. So just come and burn. So using a soft round brush, just come and burn those areas. So with this, you're going to be able to add shape or dimension to this image. So let's see the before and after for the dodging and burning. So close this, you can see the before, after, and the image really has shape or dimension added to it. And when you feel like that is too much, you can come and select maybe the dodging if at all it is too much, and reduce on the opacity. So basically that is how to do the dodging and burning to your images in Photoshop. So the next question I was getting more was how to best do the eye and teeth whitening for your images. And in order to do that, we're going to create a stamp visible layer by hitting or clicking Shift Alternate Control E on the keyboard, or Shift Alternate Command E on the keyboard. So Shift Alternate Command E on the keyboard, or Shift Alternate Control E on the keyboard, and that is going to create a screenshot or a stamp visible layer for all we have done onto this image. And what we are going to do next is going to our filter and come in the camera raw filter. So the camera raw filter, that is where we can best do the eye and teeth whitening for the images in Photoshop. So just come and click right here, or you can use Command plus to zoom into the eyes. You can now zoom in your image and simply use the space bar and left click to get the hand tool, and you can now zoom into the eyes. So in order to whiten eyes, we're going to be using a tool in the camera raw filter known as the adjustment brush tool. So in order to use the adjustment brush tool the best way possible, you have to simply come and select it. So you can use K on the keyboard. So K is the default for the adjustment brush tool. It is the default shortcut for the adjustment brush tool. And we now have to set up this adjustment brush tool. So in order to set it up, we usually, in the white area of the eye, we usually have some yellows, and in order to eliminate yellows from a particular area in Photoshop, you have to know that the opposite of yellow is blue. So when I turn this slider towards the blue side, it means I'll be getting less of the yellows in the white area of the eye. So I'm just going to move this up to around, let me just go in for around 21, and we have some greens into the white area of the eye. So the opposite of green is magenta. So just move this magenta just like that up to around, let's just go with around 51, and we are going to be adding some kind of popping feel to the eye. And what I usually do, I turn the highlights up to around 4 and the whites too towards the same value. And since we have some other random colors in the white area of the eye, we have to come and desaturate those colors up to around -65. And simply, when you're done setting up your adjustment brush tool, that means that you're good to go to start whitening the white area of the eye. Remember, we are only whitening what should be white in the white area of the eye. So come and simply left click. So left click and start drawing over the white area just like that. And you can see that this has already whitened the white area of the eye, and it is really natural and not looking blue like I have seen many of you people do when you're trying to do the whitening of the white area of the eye. So just come and click on that and just whiten what should be white. And remember, this area right here is not white, so that's why you don't have to paint it. So after doing that, you can use Command minus to zoom out, and you can see that the eye is really naturally white, and you can now come and simply hit OK. So we want to see the before and after for the eye whitening. So this is the before, and after, before, after. And the other thing I've seen, or the other question we want to handle in this tutorial is going to be how I usually have dark blacks in shadows or maybe the hair of the models. So the very first thing I do in order to have that rich black color, remember when we are trying to do or process images, we tend to pull up the shadows, and that tends to affect the black color in the hair maybe or in the outfit of the model. So in order to get back that color, I simply come to the selective color and click on it, and I have to look for the color that I want, which is black. So click on blacks, and I'm targeting the black color in the black. So come to the black slider and simply move it up, and you can see that darkens the hair. You can see it darkens every dark area in the image, and it really makes it pop a little bit more. So I'm just going to close this. You can see the before and after. And when you feel like it has not done a really nice or decent job, don't make sure that you don't take it over 10 or 15, because that is going to really look weird. So the other technique I prefer to use, I'm just going to create another stamp visible layer by hitting Shift Alternate Command E on the keyboard. Then I come to where it says burn. So look for your dodge and burn tool. So we have the dodge tool and the burn tool. So I'm just going to be, remember, burn darkens. So look for this and get the burn tool, and the range has to be midtones. Exposure, I usually prefer to use 35%, and make sure protect tones is checked on, and you can increase on the size of your burn tool by using the box brackets on the keyboard. So just come and start painting over maybe the hair to darken it, just like that, to get that nice and rich black color in the hair area. So just come and do that, but don't overdo it. So just paint over the hair, and that is going to get you the best result. So let's see before, after, before, after. I hope you can see what we have just done to darken the model's hair in this case. So the other thing that I want to tackle or handle in this tutorial, I think I've handled most or majority of the questions. And the next thing that I would love to handle is exporting your images so that they don't change in color after you have been able to retouch them in Photoshop. So the best way I would recommend, or I will always recommend from day one, and if at all you have watched all my tutorials, I usually recommend this, is simply coming to File, Export, and you come to Export As. So if at all you have been having that issue whereby your images change in color after you have been able to work on them in Photoshop, just use the option I'm just showing you right now. So you go to File, then you come to Export, look for Export As, and when you have this Export As option, rather, it is going to load, and under preview we have the image that we have just worked on, and this is the size of the image depending on the size you want. So you can now come and change the quality depending on the size or the quality of the image that you want to use, but I would recommend that you always leave the quality at 100%. So 100% is the best one. So since we want a sharp image, I have so many questions about why my images look sharper and yours look blurry after retouching. So come and select the resample to bicubic sharper. So look for bicubic sharper. So resample and change it to bicubic sharper. So this is what we have, and I usually don't tamper with these values right here. And those that have been having issues about images changing in color after you've been able to retouch them in Photoshop, you have to come and select these two options right here. So we have convert to sRGB and also embed the color profile. So usually when you are retouching or color grading, you want to embed everything into the image. So if at all you don't embed the color profile that I've been able to put into the image, it is not going to be applied into your image, and when you post it on social media, it is going to be looking a little bit different from what you had in Photoshop when you are doing the skin retouching. So when you check this, it means that you're good to go, and you can come and simply hit export. And right now you look for a folder where you want to save your image or your retouched image, and simply hit save. And after it has been, or it has finished saving, it is going to close this window automatically. So basically this has been a video about your questions and everything that most of you people ask me to do in Photoshop. And if at all you find this really helpful, don't forget to like this video and don't forget to subscribe this channel. If at all you have been watching from this channel for the very first time, Ronix from ronnixphotography, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at ronnixphotography, and also follow me on TikTok at ronnixmotegeki, and also follow me on Twitter at ronnixug. And I'll see you in yet more tutorials on this channel. Don't forget to keep practicing if at all you want to be better at skin retouching.